Hey everyone, it's Kenji. The video that you're about to watch is based on my most recent Ask Kenji column in the New York Times. It is about when you should be adding salt to your eggs if you're going to be scrambling them, and specifically whether you should salt your eggs before scrambling, during scrambling, or after, and what difference it makes. I made this video a couple weeks ago before the article was published and before I'd finished doing all of the research and writing for it, so you might find that there are some minor discrepancies in the descriptions of the science behind this between the video and the article. The article is a little bit more up to date. However, the practical elements, when you should be salting your eggs, the effects that it has, all of that is going to be accurate whether you watch the video or read the article. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it helps you improve your scrambled eggs. And if you want the article, check for the link in the description. All right, I will see you on the other side. Here we go. Hey everyone, it's Kenji. We're going to do an egg experiment today. So I get this question all the time. When is the right time to salt your eggs for scrambling them? You will have heard someone, other chefs say that you should never salt your eggs before cooking them. That you should add the salt at the end because, it might make your eggs watery, or it might make them runny. Or I've even heard people say that it'll make your eggs gray, whatever that means. I have never in my life seen gray eggs. However, if you've read my book, The Food Lab, you'll know that I've tested this pretty extensively, and you might know what the answer to this is. But I thought, just to put it to rest, I'm gonna do a little experiment today, and I'll show you what happens when you salt your eggs in advance versus not. So I've got in here 4 eggs. I weighed them out in advance. They weighed 200 grams, and the reason I'm doing them in these clear glasses is because I want you to see what happens to the eggs as they rest. So one batch I will salt and let it rest, and the other batch I will not salt, and I'll just add the same amount of salt at the end. All right, so that's pretty well beaten. So here I've got 2 identical batches of eggs, okay? I've measured out 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. One of them I'm going to salt right now, okay? I'll beat that in. And we're gonna let this sit for 15 minutes, all right? Let's do a time lapse of this, okay? So you can see what happens. So we're gonna start our 15-minute time lapse right now. "15 minutes. All right, so you can see there's a big difference in what happened here. So the ones that were salted on this side, they've become a much deeper orange color. The reason that happens is because when you salt eggs, it starts to break down some of the proteins in there. If you imagine your proteins as these kind of balls of yarn that are kind of tangled up with each other, almost like a 3-dimensional net, sort of like a sponge is a 3-dimensional net. Here, the proteins are a little bit more tightly wound together, and so they don't let light through as easily, whereas here, they start to dissolve a little bit from the salt, and so they let light through more readily. And so your eggs look a little bit more translucent as opposed to more opaque. That is going to make a big difference in how they cook. Well, not a big difference, but it will make a difference in how they cook. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I've got this nonstick pan here. I've got it heated to 300 degrees. I'm using the Control Freak so that I know it's exactly 300 degrees. It's gonna be the same temperature for both batches of eggs. I'm also gonna cook them for the exact same amount of time. So what I'll do is when I cook the first batch of eggs, I will set a timer. Start a timer, and I'll time how long it takes me to cook them. The second batch of eggs, I will cook the exact same amount of time. So same temperature, same time. We're gonna use the same amount of eggs, the same amount of salt. I'm gonna use the same amount of oil. I'm using oil because there's less variability in oil than there is in, say, butter, which has, proteins and water and other stuff that might interfere. I wanna try and minimize the number of variables here. All right, so I'm using 1/2 teaspoon of vegetable oil. Okay. And here we go. And as the eggs go in, I'm going to start this timer. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So what's happening, of course, is your egg proteins are starting to tighten up. So they coagulate. So it's as if you have those balls of yarn in there and they're tangling up with each other now. And as that happens, they form a sort of tighter and tighter net around the water and other stuff that's in there. All right, let's call that done. 28 seconds it was, okay? I'm gonna pour these out into a fine mesh strainer here, and I'm gonna have it set over this pan. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to wait and see how much liquid comes out of those eggs. Okay, ready? So I'll be back in 1 minute later. All right, so that's the amount of liquid that came out of there. I'm going to transfer these to here. So these are our pre-salted eggs. I don't know, they don't look watery to me. They certainly don't look gray to me. Let me try a taste. They taste moist. Well seasoned, very moist. Nice and soft and delicious. All right, now we're gonna cook the second batch of eggs. I'm gonna salt them just before adding them to the pan. In fact, you know what I'll do is I'll salt them at the very end. I'll salt them while they're cooking, when they're actually in the pan, to make sure that there's no interference going on between the salt and the eggs before they start to cook. All right, so our pan's back at 300 degrees. I'm gonna add half a teaspoon of oil. I've got my salt and my eggs ready. Okay, I'm gonna start my timer for 28 seconds as soon as the eggs hit the pan. And 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, I'm gonna salt them. And we'll cook them the same way. So again, you can see the eggs are starting to set up. Their proteins are binding together. The more you heat the eggs, the tighter those proteins are going to bind, and the firmer the eggs are going to become. All right. Now straight into this pan. And we will also let this drain for exactly 1 minute. All right, so I'll be back in 1 minute. All right, so for point of reference, this is the amount of moisture that came out of the pre-salted eggs. Now, all right, this is the amount of moisture that came out of the eggs that I salted at the last minute. So you can pretty easily see how much more liquid came out of the eggs that I salted at the last minute versus the eggs that I salted in advance. And that's because what happens is when you salt the eggs in advance, the proteins, as I mentioned, they loosen up a little bit. They aren't bound as tightly. And therefore, when they start to set, as they get tighter and tighter and tighter, they don't tighten up quite as much. So in the same way that a sponge, when you squeeze it too hard, the liquid starts to leak out of it, the same thing will happen with eggs here. As you cook them harder and harder, the harder you squeeze them, the more you cook them, the harder they squeeze, and the more liquid will weep out. Salting the eggs in advance keeps them from squeezing too hard, and so all that moisture stays in the eggs instead of leaking out of them. So you can see this moisture, I drained it off, but if I add it back to the actual eggs where they were in the first place, and where they would be if I were to just transfer to a bowl to eat, you can see it makes the eggs, well, it makes them watery. So the actual curds themselves are drier, and they're coated in the water that should have been held inside the curds. Whereas these ones, the curds are moister. The water, it remains inside the eggs. The moisture is in the eggs, as opposed to here where the moisture gets squeezed out onto the surface of the eggs. And they taste wetter. Salting the eggs in advance gives you curds that are tender and moist and retain their liquid. Adding the salt at the end gives you curds that are also tender and moist because you're not overcooking them, but the liquid that squeezes out ends up on the surface of the eggs instead of in the eggs. You know, there is no right or wrong about this. It's really what you want. Maybe you like this texture. Maybe you like that sort of weepy texture, and that's fine. If you like that, salt your eggs as they're cooking, salt them at the end if you want. If you want eggs that have a moister curd, where the moisture stays inside the eggs, then I would suggest salting in advance. I've tested this a ton. Up to about 15 minutes in advance is all you need. After that, you sort of get, diminishing returns. So what I like to do in the morning is I will come down, if I'm making breakfast, I will break my eggs, salt them first thing that I do when I get down here. Then I'll turn on the coffee machine. Maybe I'll make a slice of toast, whatever. Let the eggs sit there on the counter. When the toast is done, that's when the eggs go in the pan. I don't need to salt them again after that. The salt will have had a few minutes to work its magic, and the eggs come out tender and moist. All right. That is my little experiment. You know, if you think I did anything wrong methodology-wise or you don't trust me, the good thing about this is that it's very easy to do this on your own. If there are other questions you have about eggs, or you think that my methodology was wrong and you want to do something different, go ahead and try it yourself at home and tell me what the results are. I'm curious to see what your results are, if they match mine or if you try something different and you come up with a brilliant new hypothesis you want to test. Please share them with me because I always like to learn. All right, guys, gals, non-binary pals, this is my egg salting experiment. And those are the results. I salt my eggs in advance, and I think you should too, but you do you. All right, see you later.